work for it, ride for it, I'ma organize for it, stay up in the night and in the morning I'ma rise for it, heart for it, mind for it, ears for it, eyes for it, peace and a place on this earth for me and mine for it, work for it, ride for it, I'ma organize for it, stay up in the night and in the morning I'ma rise for it, heart for it, mind for it, ears for it, eyes for it, peace and a place on this earth for me and mine for it.
This has been a rugged winter.
Yeah. That's what I've been hearing from other Minnesotans. And I'm like, yo, yeah, this shit is too long.
Yeah.
That's the worst part about it. It's
That's
like,
right.
I'm ready for this shit to be over.
I swear.
Oh.
Wait till it's March. And you're
Yeah. And it can always snow in May. It can always snow.
I think last year it snowed in April, like after everything melted.
Yeah.
I was so mad.
Yeah. Yeah. But then there's like 5 nice days from February to April. You know, there's like freakishly
Once a
warm. I can wear once a month you get a nice day where you can wear a t-shirt and you hope it coincides with a weekend day.
Yeah. Damn.
Oh,
Those days feel so good, though. It's
Yeah.
like a high feeling.
it is. It is.
No lie. Like, what was it the other day? Was it like 30 the other day? And
Like
I
negative
almost
30?
no,
Oh,
it was-
30.
When it warmed
30.
up.
Yeah, I deadass almost like rolled down my windows. I was like, what's going on?
You're out there walking at you.
What's happening to me?
It's so
This
real.
isn't roll down your windows weather.
Oh, yeah. Did you figure out the heat in your apartment?
No, I mean, I emailed my landlord about it, and like, I have an old boiler heater, and she was just like, it cuts off at night because it's too noisy.
What?
So,
What? Too
Yeah.
noisy for? Is there someone living next to the boiler?
I live above it.
Oh.
So yeah, just from like 1 a.m. to 8 a.m. I'm cold as fuck.
That
Yeah.
sucks.
That doesn't seem good.
Those are important hours.
Yeah. And I'm often waking up in the middle of the night to like turn my space heater back on.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
At least you'll have something to brag about when you're gone from Minnesota. You could tell people in the
I
South
made
what
it
it was
through.
really like.
The trenches.
You don't even know what a space heater is.
Right.
All right, my plan for today, if it's cool with you guys, is I want to start a little opener by asking everybody about their relationship with Canada, if you have any.
Okay.
All right.
It's a good opener.
And then
Yeah.
I want to just walk through basically an overview of like why we're talking about the Royal Bank of Canada, some history of the Royal Bank of Canada, and then some reflection on finance, capital, the Royal Bank of Canada, et cetera. And everybody's going to have to bear with me today because I have a lot of notes that I'm trying to like discern through, but we'll make it work. So I posed that question to you all. Do you have any relationship with Canada? Let's start with Amber, who's joining us today.
I'm back to complain about weather. Once again. And actually so Canada connections. Not a lot of people know this. This is an interesting fact about me. I lived in Alaska
Oh, shit.
Oh, wow.
when I was in 6th grade for 2 years. And then I moved back to North Carolina.
Oh, wow.
And my family, my dad was in the military and got stationed there. And so we moved there for 2 years. And like the military offered us money if we drove.
Wow.
So we drove from North Carolina to Alaska,
Damn.
which is like a 7-day road trip.
That's
Yeah. So I drove through Canada. That was like my first time. Well, I didn't drive. My parents drove through Canada. But yeah, that was my first time there. And I remember seeing like bears on the side of the road and stuff. Because like we were like in the western part
drinking
of
maple
Canada.
syrup.
And that's when we started seeing like moose and stuff. And
Wow.
yeah. So it was really beautiful. And then I just other connections is like I always associate it with like liberalism and how liberalism likes to like romanticize Canada as if it's like some perfect utopian place. but
Important
it's
theme we're going to touch on today. Yeah.
teeing it up.
Do you have any favorite Canadian MCs?
Oh shit.
Or least favorite?
No, I gotta save that.
I'll put you real shit.
Yeah. I have thoughts about Drake, but I don't want to share them
That's another
publicly.
show. I got you.
That's a Patreon episode.
Exactly. All right, Deanna.
I've been there once. I drove. Well, my friend and I drove there. He drove after I graduated from high school because the drinking age in Montreal is 18. And so we drove from Jersey, and it was like not that long of a drive. I think like 10, 12 hours. And it was really easy getting in. And I was thinking about this today, actually, because I was thinking about like border crossing and how easy it is to get into Mexico or Canada.
Yeah.
But it's like, when leaving Canada, they were like, had our pop our trunk and check everything. And it was very clear we had some like 3.5% apple cider in the trunk, and we were like not 21 and wrote class of 2010 on the car. And they were just like, whatever.
Something's not ready.
They did not give a fuck about like, some shitty hard cider that was, a 12-pack in the trunk that like we ate warm or drank warm, later. But Montreal was really beautiful. We biked. Remember biking, and I'm like,
That's
I don't
awesome.
think I could do that today. But like, we camped and stayed at a hotel and felt really fancy for being 18.
Hell yeah. Montreal is Eastern Canada.
It is right north of Vermont.
Okay.
So like when coming back, we like stopped in Vermont, and that was when Scott Pilgrim was coming out. So we like went to see Scott Pilgrim because I was reading the books and like,
Throwback.
yeah,
I don't
ate
even know what
maple
that
candy. What? Man. Okay.
Scott Pilgrim, I don't like him.
Scott Pilgrim versus the World, right? That was
Yeah.
It was
like
really
know
Ramona
about that?
Flowers.
Yeah.
Like she was definitely a
saw
style icon. Like, man, this is some white people culture
What
that
year
I'm
was
really into.
What year was it?
This is 2010. This is what 2010 when the movie came out.
And this Michael Cera's in it.
Yeah,
and
Michael
that was
Cera.
like peak Michael Cera.
It was
era.
It was like kind of comic booky.
Yeah, because it's
Vibe.
based off a
I
comic
don't know who
book.
Michael Cera is. Hey, 2010, I was
Wait,
stressing
wait,
about
wait.
my student
Wait,
loans getting high, okay? I wasn't paying attention.
Really? You don't know who Michael Cera is?
The name kind of rings a bell. I don't know.
All right, I'll show you some YouTube video
All
clips
right,
later.
Isaac, any Canadian exploits? Smuggled anything back from Canada?
Not yet, but honestly, just one trip to Thunder Bay when I was like a kid. I think my
Okay.
parents took us for like a camping trip. I think we went like North Shore and then kept going up to Thunder Bay.
Thunder
So-
Bay's like right up there, basically north of Minnesota.
yeah, it's
on the
right
lake.
right across the border. I'm pretty sure, and it's a
Okay.
pretty big city. I think.
I think so too.
But yeah, not much besides that. Honestly, just like
We live so close to Canada. Like,
I swear.
it's like when you're in Minnesota, it's like, do I want to go somewhere colder?
Right. Exactly.
That's kind of the vibe.
Yeah. I've played baseball against Thunder Bay teams before. They used to travel down here. I've never been to Canada myself, but my grandmother was born in Canada. My dad's mother was born in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, which is like Western Canada above like North Dakota, Montana area, I'm pretty sure. And I'll say, before Drake, the first Canadian MC I ever heard was Cardinal Official from Toronto. You ever heard of Cardinal Official? Cardinal Official was dope. When I was a kid, I was glad that's how I learned that there was like a Caribbean diaspora in Toronto and kind of got a sense of Toronto. And then I've had homies from here, predominantly Somali people, who go back and forth from Toronto. There's a big Somali community in Toronto. So I've kind of got like some taste of like Toronto rap and stuff from Somali homies.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, the reason I asked you all about your Canadian experience is because today we're talking about the Royal Bank of Canada. So for listeners of the show, you might recognize the Royal Bank of Canada kind of as a periphery character that's shown up a couple times when we're talking about the Upper Harbor Terminal. And that is because Royal Bank of Canada has a strong partnership and relationship with the Polad companies. This is a major capitalist entity that we talk about on the show because they're the lead developers. One of their companies, United Properties, is a major real estate developer in the Twin Cities, and they're developing this piece of land in North Minneapolis, the Upper Harbor. And looking into them, I found out Royal Bank of Canada. So they currently downtown, United Properties is headquartered inside RBC Plaza. It's one of the biggest skyscrapers downtown. I can't point out which one it is, but it's like one of those right on Nicollet Mall by the IDS, one of the biggest buildings. They share office space there. And they are building a new building downtown. It's the first Class A skyscraper built in this century in Minneapolis. They bought a piece of public land from the city right on Washington and Hennepin, like kitty corner from the Whole Foods down there for people in the cities. And they're building this luxury tower. It's going to be 33 stories. It's going to have the first 5-star luxury hotel the city's ever had. It's going to have, I think, 22 limited $1 million private condo residences. It's going to be the U.S. headquarters of Royal Bank of Canada's wealth management operations, and it's going to be the headquarters of United Properties. So to me, this is like a very important project to look at when you see this piece of public land turned over to these two major capitalist institutions and then completely built to serve wealth. You know, there's all the needs in this city and that real estate, and it's going to be $1 million condos and headquarters for financial management. So that's when I've been interested in the Royal Bank of Canada the whole time we've been doing the show. So today we're going to talk about them a bit. I'm going to call them RBC sometimes, Royal Bank of Canada, RBC. They also came up in the show, again, talking about the Minneapolis housing market. Folks who've been listening know we've covered the issue of public housing, that the city of Minneapolis has undergone an intense privatization of public housing through two programs, Section 18, and one is called RAD, Rental Assistance Demonstration. And what RAD did is it opened up ownership of public housing towers in South Minneapolis, Elliott Twins, to private capital, private investment. So RBC and Royal Bank of Canada was that investor. So the Royal Bank of Canada is now a partial owner of the Elliott Twins' former public housing towers in South Minneapolis. So to me, I'm like, okay, damn, they got this big tower going up downtown. Here they are again, you know, buying up. So they obviously have a presence in the city. The third time they show up in a major way is what we all watched this summer, and what we've all watched is like a low-grade war being waged against indigenous people in Minnesota and people trying to protect the water by Enbridge, a Canadian corporation that's building this Line 3 pipeline. We've seen people brutalized continuously. We've seen oil spills not cleaned up. We know that the Mississippi River watershed is under threat. They're violating the sovereignty of indigenous people in Minnesota. It's a huge fight. The one of the top investors in not only this Line 3, but Enbridge as a company and the whole Canadian tar sands economy is the Royal Bank of Canada. The Royal Bank of Canada is directly on the hook for those. You know, Enbridge was paying police officers, buying police officers who were off duty to harass and intimidate protesters. And that's RBC money. Royal Bank of Canada gave them the money. So that's why we're talking about the Royal Bank of Canada today. You know, I want to figure out who they are and what it means that they're at play here. And then I think two goals of the show is we want to sketch out kind of the local capitalist class and our local economy, and then also figure out ways that that's tied into the international economy. And I think this is a good story for that.
Can so does RBC, so they're from Canada.
Yes.
And they operate in the United States. Do they operate in other countries?
They are a global operation, and we're going to spend a lot of time today talking about some of their global operations.
Yeah.
They're the largest bank in Canada, the largest financial institution in Canada, and one of the largest in the world.
Oh, okay.
I think they pulled like $16 billion in profit this past year, something like that.
Yeah.
Wow. I saw. And gave out like over $10 billion in bonuses to their executive staff last year. $10 billion
for executive staff
bonuses. Yeah.
That's like how many people? Like 100 people? Like how many people?
I can't
is
imagine.
executive staff?
I'm not sure. I can't imagine it's a ton though.
It's a ton, yeah, and it's they have 1.62 trillion in assets. They
insane.
Employ more than 86,000 people and serve 17 million customers. So should we?
That's a lot of people.
It really is. Should we talk about where they're from?
Yes.
How they started? All right. So I think this is an interesting piece. So the Royal Bank of Canada was founded in Halifax, Nova Scotia in 1864, and it was founded by a small group of maritime trade merchants. So this is like important to the whole story, I think, to understand this particular point in history when they started and this particular location. So you think Halifax, Nova Scotia, the very eastern coast of Canada, that was a British colony, and it was connected to the slave trade in the Caribbean economy, right? So the capital that founded RBC came from British trade in enslaved Africans, and then tobacco, sugar, rum that was coming from the labor of enslaved Africans brought up north. They were, people look at that Atlantic trade basically that built that first round of capitalism. That's when the RBC was first built. It was merchants from that economy who got together and created a bank. And at first it was one of a few banks that started at that time. And basically the story is they consolidated and became the biggest institution in Canada.
Wait, what year was that again?
That
Sorry.
was in 1864
Oh,
when they
okay.
were started.
So the
Gotcha.
Civil War was,
It ended in 65.
there you go. Thank you.
So it was
Yeah.
happening in 64. It's actually, when I was doing some research, I heard that came up. They were saying that Nova Scotia came up during the Civil War because some of the ports were inaccessible in the United States. So some of the British trade that was happening on the eastern seaboard of the United States
moved
moved up
up.
to Halifax.
Gotcha.
And so that was like a period where they came up off the Civil War, basically. So that Caribbean piece is really important. And then I think it's really important I want to just give like the rough sketch of how they moved west in Canada before we talk more about the Caribbean. And basically, the Royal Bank took capital that was built from the maritime economy, that's like the sea-based economy, and then it used that capital to finance westward expansion in Canada. That's really how the Royal Bank of Canada moved west, and they really were some of the driving force of Western settler colonialism in Canada. So they were buying railroads, they financed the railroads, they were doing land speculation, they were financing the timber industries and the fishing industries. And as they moved west, they acquired more banks and they became this Royal Bank of Canada. And I think that's really important because what we see today, they're some of the main financiers in the tar sands oil project, one of the most extractive, disgusting projects in the world, really. And also that's, violating indigenous people and indigenous people's land. That's a continuation of what they've always done. They've really driven that process the whole time. Okay, so that's kind of the story. The next piece I want to talk about, you kind of hinted at it, Deanna, is that, and we talked about them, being built off this capital that came from the Caribbean, is they really dominated financial imperialism in the Caribbean, the Royal Bank of Canada. That was like, they expanded all across the world, but their real focus was in the Caribbean. So I want to just read a little bit about how they got into Cuba. So a few months after the U.S. began its 1898 to 1902 occupation of Cuba, so for listeners who might not be familiar, the Cuban people fought a war of independence against the Spanish Empire who held Cuba. And at the end of that war, the Americans got involved and then prevented the Cuban people from establishing a real sovereign economy and country. And that's when the imperialist domination of Cuba started and the U.S. occupied Cuba after they got their independence to assert dominance. So during that 1898 to 1902 occupation, the Royal Bank opened its first branches in Havana. According to one bank history, the general manager, Mr. E.L. Pierce, took a trip to Cuba at the end of the Spanish-American War and got in on the ground floor of banking there. His American friends, who had put capital into his bank, helped him to expand there. And once in the beautiful city of Havana, Pierce befriended U.S. Consul Joseph Springer, who indicated that the U.S. planned to reform Cuba's financial sector. And what it stresses here is that there was this coordination between RBC for Royal Bank of Canada to become the main financier, because at that time it was illegal for U.S. banks to open up branches outside of the United States. So the U.S. diplomats who were kind of shaping the economy in Cuba invited the Royal Bank of Canada to kind of win Western interests and take hold. So in 1903, RBC took over the Banco de Oriente in Santiago de Cuba, which was a former Spanish Bank, whose directors owned the majority share of the United Railways of Havana, the largest railroads in the Republic. So Royal Bank of Canada at that time seized control of the railroads. The merger positioned them to handle the accounts of the North American Railroad and sugar companies expanding in eastern Cuba. Also in 1903, the Cuban government awarded the Royal Bank of Canada the commission to distribute $56 million being paid to veterans of the Cuban Army of Liberation. So people who had fought in the war against the Spanish, Royal Bank of Canada stepped in and became the people who handled their payments and took a fee off of that, and then was able to build their customer base off of that, right? So already foreign capital dominating the economy of Cuba. So basically, the RBC emerged as the strongest competitor to U.S. banks operating in Cuba and in the Caribbean region as a whole.
I think we did see RBC, didn't we? In Jamaica.
There's Scotiabank. I don't know if that's related, but I'm sure they own other banks, right?
Scotiabank is not one that they own. Scotiabank comes up a lot when they're talking about RBC, but RBC is definitely in Jamaica. It talks about in here the way that I'm going to kind of get there a little bit, but we can talk about it now, because I wanted to kind of talk about this first period of the 1900s, kind of before World War II, and the way and then talk about after World War II. But RBC played a dominant role all through the British Caribbean and in Jamaica, and is one of the reasons why Jamaica is still in debt today, because the RBC helped to structure their IMF loans.
Oh, right.
In the late 70s,
Exactly.
80s. Yeah.
And we'll get into that for listeners. Another quick piece is, like, I can't talk about all and again, I'm not an expert on any of this stuff, just sharing what I've been reading, but the RBC was involved with the U.S. occupation in Haiti in 1919, and most Americans don't know that the U.S. has occupied many Caribbean countries many times over, has occupied Haiti many times, and the Royal Bank of Canada was always in the mix. So you got this story of, like, the first decades of the 1900s, them consolidating more and more control in Cuba, more and more owning the state apparatus, owning the railroads, owning the sugar companies, really dominating the economy. So early in the morning of September 1st, 1931, the Royal Bank of Canada branch on La Linea Street in the wealthy Havana suburb of Vedado was almost leveled when a bomb was detonated inside it. Its mahogany doors were pulverized.
Wow.
The masonry of the building was ripped away. Parts of the stone exterior were reduced to dust. Large holes were torn in the ceiling and front entrance by heavy iron slugs packed into the device. This was a serious-ass bomb, apparently.
Yeah.
The furniture and interior fixtures were destroyed. Damage was estimated at several thousands of dollars. 27 bomb attacks in Havana during this period became normal. During one night in Havana in 1933, there was 200 explosions counted, really focusing on. This was the nascent revolutionary movement in Cuba. So we know about, the Castro Revolution, the July 26th movement in the 1950s. In the 30s, what was happening was the U.S. was installing dictator after dictator who was making sure that Cuba stayed in the hands of the Royal Bank of Canada and these foreign institutions, and the people were fighting back. So Royal Bank of Canada became a target of anti-imperialist organizing in Cuba and in the Caribbean as a whole. There's a bunch of stories where it talked about some stuff in Puerto Rico, it talked about Haiti, it talked about Jamaica, that they really became a symbol of foreign imperialism. And I thought that one story of the bomb was like, I like the way that was written, and just kind of to show that they've been doing what they're doing in Minnesota in many places for a long period of time. The other thing that I thought was interesting about that is, I'll read one more thing. Machado was one of these dictators in Cuba. He had pledged to protect North American banking interests and had repeatedly intervened on behalf at any signs of trouble. And with Machado gone, they ousted him. The banks were increasingly targeted, but attacks against banks also occurred on the ground throughout the island and all sectors of the Cuban society. The day after Machado was removed from power, the Royal Bank financed Palmyra Sugar Company in Cienfuegos was occupied by 500 men armed with guns and truncheons. They were joined by workers from a nearby mill that the Royal Bank owned, and another mill that the Royal Bank here we go. Workers from nearby mill that Royal Bank had taken over in the wave of foreclosures in the 1920s. So, there was foreclosures. That's how the Royal Bank ended up owning all these mills and all these factories. And basically they're saying there was worker uprisings all throughout the island where their stuff was getting occupied and getting taken over. This was this wave that would happen. The U.S. and Canadian financiers would reestablish dominance until the Cuban Revolution that endures to this day. And what's interesting is I don't really know why, but the Royal Bank of Canada was the last bank to get nationalized by the Cuban government. Like one of the first things they did was kick out all the foreign capital, but they let Royal Bank of Canada stay for like a year or something like that. But eventually the Royal Bank of Canada was nationalized by the Cuban Revolution. And I mean, that's a big part of why that's such a shining example and a beacon now is because they're one of the few countries that was able to actually make that move and then not be re-violated. You know, I mean, they were, but they were able to retain some autonomy.
Wait, what does that mean that they nationalized RBC?
That means the government seized their assets and their locations, and it became a public bank.
Oh, okay. So then it was no longer RBC?
Right, exactly. So the RBC had to write off those assets. But I think in recent years, there's been a reintroduction of some RBC services into Cuba.
Huh.
Yeah. But it basically means it's like they expropriated them. So everything that the RBC owned, the government now owns that.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, wait, so RBC bought a bunch of foreclosed like mills? Is that what you were saying earlier? And then that's how they consolidated or continued to like grow their empire?
Yeah, from my understanding, it was like they even caused the foreclosure. So they were like the main investors who were offering the loans to the farmers, charging exorbitant interest rates. And then when farmers couldn't pay back, you know, their loans, the RBC seized control of their factories, and they owned the railway stations. They owned they did a lot of the public sector banking. They offered, even like before the IMF loans, they were offering financing to the government. So then a lot of the public money was coming back to RBC. They're basically not just RBC, but all these Western financial institutions.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds familiar. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, same setup. Maybe this is a good time to say it because one thing I wanted to bring in is like, you know, in the revolutionary tradition, Marxists have named imperialism really as being about finance capital. So finance capital is money capital, right? And you no longer make profit based off of producing a good. You've acquired so much money capital that you make money just off of money. And what Lenin wrote a lot about imperialism, and he talked about it being the domination of finance capital. And I saw the rhyme throughout this story because he was naming it was at the end of the 19th century, at the late 1800s, when this imperialist era really kicked off. And it really was right when the Royal Bank, I mean, he was probably writing about the Royal Bank of Canada, you know? And what he was saying is that capitalism had overdeveloped in Canada and in the United States, so there was no longer a market they couldn't make profitable investment any longer. So, and that's what defines imperialism then, is like the export of capital to find profits elsewhere. So that's exactly what the Royal Bank of Canada did, right? They went and invested in Cuba and the rest of the Caribbean to extract from the Caribbean. So really just naming that what we're talking about today is imperialism, the financial structure of imperialism.
Right.
And how like the global south is always like a test dummy for that.
Exactly. And saying like, and that's what he's saying, like what Lenin predicted and what has become true is that relationship means that the global south is locked into that position of extraction.
Right.
It becomes a sphere of influence of these major imperialist players. And that unless there's like a revolutionary intervention, that relationship will always be one of extraction. They'll never be, the national economy will never be able to develop. And we've seen that, you know? Yeah.
Can I just add something really quick?
Please.
Okay, so that reminds me, I just before I came here, I was listening to this episode of This Is Hell that was talking about vaccine apartheid and how that's playing out with like the vaccines right now and how, you know, like the US, both Moderna and Pfizer are like made by the US and they're not like separate entities. And I don't know. And basically the whole episode was getting at how, of course, like global capitalism is going to like extend the pandemic because of their prioritizing this leverage
Certainly.
that they want to maintain instead of really like spreading the vaccine
100%
everywhere.
Yeah, 100%. Okay. So we talked about, you know, that first phase of imperialism, I wanted to talk about a few other things. One thing I wanted to read was just these two paragraphs that I was doing when I was doing research. I thought this was really telling. By 1939, total assets were more than $1 billion for the second time in 10 years, and the bank was ready to take advantage of the opportunities World War II offered. Ain't that an ill sentence? Gross.
Wait, 1 billion then?
They had $1 billion in 1939.
Okay.
And the way they wrote it, this is like from a history of the bank. The bank was ready to take advantage of the opportunities World War II offered.
Yeah.
And you know what I'm saying? It just
Disaster capitalism.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It just, and they talk about it in this research that like 100% they financed war. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's a big piece of like how financialism works. So the last thing I want to talk about a little bit was just like kind of another example of how this works. We talked about Cuba in the first part of the 20th century. In the second part of the 20th century, I want to talk about Grenada. So the Grenada was Grenada or Grenada?
It's Grenada.
Grenada, thank you.
My dad wanted to let you know that it's pronounced Grenada.
Thank you, sir. I thought I was being cultured, you know. Grenada.
No, he
Grenada.
was listening to our meeting when we were, at their place, and he was like, "Yeah, the only thing I want to let Jake know is that it's Grenada. That if you go to Grenada, that's what they say." And I was like, "All right, thanks, Dad."
Hey,
So
I'll
that's
take lessons
me
from
passing
the
that
professor
on.
any day.
Yeah.
Hell yeah. But basically, it's like the British Caribbean didn't get independence until much later than the Spanish Caribbean, you know? So like it was after 1950. I think Grenada, I don't know the exact year, but it was like in the 70s. I think it was like 70s and 80s when some of the smaller islands that were dominated by the British gained independence. And what you saw was the Royal Bank of Canada and these other Western financial interests were involved in the structuring of their independence, you know? And this is where these countries needed foreign aid in order to do anything because Britain had developed an economy where there wasn't ownership on the islands, there wasn't productive forces on the islands. And the RBC would work with the International Monetary Fund to put these countries in debt traps basically from the start to say, we'll offer you this money, but on condition that you have to follow certain austerity measures to make sure you make payments back, which means you can't set a minimum wage higher than a certain amount. You can't enforce environmental protections, and you can't have local ownership. You can't say we want national ownership of industries. You have to allow foreign investment and foreign ownership. So it's really, this is important because this is where we see clearly that like investment from finance capital is a predatory act. So people say like, oh, we need investment. Investment is a seizing control of, and that's what happened in these nations where they would offer a loan, the government wouldn't be able to pay back the loan, and they'd be broke. So then on condition of more money, they'd have to go sell more of their country off. They'd have to give up more of their sovereignty. A lot of times then like financial managers would be put in over the sovereign government. And that's really the story of the Caribbean. Like, you know, if you look at Jamaica, Jamaica is underdeveloped because the IMF has them in a debt trap. So they can't raise their wages. They can't invest in public spheres. They can't do public development. And the Royal Bank of Canada is one of the major profiteers of this setup in the Caribbean and other places in the global south. The reason why Grenada is important because Grenada had a revolution. And what I learned doing this research is there was revolutionary movements in all these islands. And in most cases, the Royal Bank of Canada and the Canadian military and the U.S. military, if they tried to buck the rules of the loans, they would step in with the military and seize sovereignty. And what happened in Grenada, you know, people should look up Maurice Bishop, like a really charismatic revolutionary leader. They won power and they were pursuing a socialist course of development. They were blocking out some of the Western capital. They were investing in public sector development. Maurice Bishop was assassinated and the U.S. government invaded the island. And again, the Royal Bank of Canada asserted dominance. And I think that's a really important example because Grenada is a country of English-speaking people of African descent. You know, and Maurice Bishop had a strong affinity and relationship with African Americans, you know? So that's, I'm just saying that like learning about the RBC. I learned a little bit more about that story. And it's something really important to look into. And I just wanted to stress the violent imperialist nature of the Royal Bank of Canada.
Yeah. So they still work with IMF today.
They
Is that
do, yep.
right? Okay.
Yeah.
It talked a little bit about the way they've restructured, and they've like done different rounds of like pulling out of some of at times they like divested from the Caribbean and closed a bunch of their branches and then reinvested in a bunch of their branches. So they're definitely still on it, and they're just definitely, they're a major player in global finance. You know, they're one of the biggest financial institutions in the world. The last thing I wanted to say is like, you know, another really important move that they made was they really drove the development of the extractive energy industry in Canada. Like the Royal Bank of Canada is one of the main players behind the tar sands oils. I was looking like they were coming making speeches advocating for Line 3 and the other pipelines that they're building for many, many years. They've been aggressively pursuing it. Like if you see the Enbridge CEO making a speech, a lot of times he's making a speech along with the Royal Bank of Canada executive. Really, really foul shit.
One of the things that I'm thinking about is like, I like what you brought up about investment and how that's like often viewed as a neutral term. I just think like throughout everything you just said, it's so interesting to me and obvious how, like, I guess the generalized term of US history, like always positions imperialism as like ambivalent and like, you know, just like, oh, I guess this ended up happening, you know, like unintentionally. Oops. But I think, you know, that's still playing out today. And these connections that you brought up between the US and Canada, you know, like just thinking about, like slave trade and how the ports and, you know, going upwards, you know, to Canada and using those, like both Canada and the United States just have like this positionality as like I was saying earlier, just liberal, innocent actors that want the best for the world. And it's like, that's not the fucking case.
Not at all. True monsters, 100%. Especially Canada, the point, you know, it even talked about in here how like a lot of times the US would be more upfront with its military and take a more outwardly aggressive foreign policy, but it was really Canadian finance in particular, where like the Canadian government wouldn't be as aggressive. They always were still an imperialist actor and were aligned with the United States, but maybe would do it in a softer fashion. But that it was really that Canadian finance and Canadian capital was particularly aggressive and shrewd in the way that they moved in lockstep with the U.S. government. I thought that was interesting. One thing I think is like, I guess I have to say, because talking about finance, capital, and talking about debt and talking about investment, it always makes me think of how in debt I am. Like, I don't talk about it that much on the show, but my life is characterized by a state of debt. Like, when I was 22 years old, I came out of college with like almost $100,000 in student loan debt. You know what I'm saying? That can't be written off from bankruptcy. I've paid thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars in the last 15 years, and I owe more now than I did when I graduated. I have loans. I took on loans that was handed to me by a school administrator that have like a 12.5% interest rate and can't be written off through bankruptcy. It hasn't dominated me, but it's been a domineering force in my life, and it damn near did dominate me. You know what I'm saying? It's been like, my life is characterized by that. And what I recognize is that I'm not apart from this global financial system, right? And what happened after the US could no longer profitably manufacture, when these financial institutions led the global restructuring where they exported their capital and opened up factories in the global south, the pool for profit or investment that they saw in the United States was the privatization of the public sector and then the financialization of public goods. But similar to what they did in these global south countries. That's what Pinochet did in Chile. Is like, that's the capitalism, the idea that like, no, we can't have public things. Everything should be financialized. Everything should be a market. That's this ideology. It's a violent ideology. So I'm a first generation college student, but I didn't know that before the 1970s and 1980s, it was cheap to go to college in the United States. Relatively cheap. You know, people could go. And there was public funding to go to college in the United States. There wasn't the student debt, the $1 trillion of student debt that we hold is a $1 trillion asset that was plotted by financial institutions. That was my life, my time and my energy was seen as a profit to take hold of. You know what I'm saying? Like what should be a public good, my education, these same companies lobbied for the state to divest from it, and then they privatized it. You know what I'm saying? So like, this was a big part of my coming to political consciousness, was to realize, like, bro, I don't have bad luck. I didn't do nothing wrong. I was put in a trap. I was indebted. It's a political reality that millions of others like me are in the same position, where we're kicking all of our money upwards, and these institutions control our lives. It's incredibly political debt is, you know, on the personal level and the political level. So this was making me think more about that.
And not to keep like drawing this connection back to the pandemic, but like that's just on my mind right now, because that's what I was thinking about this morning, listening to that one episode. And yeah, like the same thing is happening in regards to the vaccine and like just access to public health globally. You know, like they're literally profiting off of not extending the vaccine to other countries. And they're like just choosing death like all the time, like at any moment for profit.
Like, it's important to understand that like a market has to be created and it has to be violently enforced. Like it's not a natural reality. And that, so keeping the vaccine as a patent and letting the market figure out, it's only in the interest of the owning class. And it's the opposite of a market is some type of common setup. You know, we have the ability to produce the vaccine and distribute it, you know, but it's not profitable. And it's the same way like education. Student debt is not a natural thing. It was a created reality. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. It reminds me of like 2008 and how they created all these mortgages that were extremely risky for people to default on, and they bet on whether or not they would default. So the same thing has happened with student loans, where now you have what are called student loan asset-backed securities, slabs, that they then bet on. So there's the billions of dollars of student loan asset-backed securities, and there's more billions of them betting on this. So it's kind of just like this creation of things for them to push around and make like money off of and get their percentages. And it's
so sick.
It's crazy. I was reading a little bit about stuff, and it's like literally a complete made-up fantasyland casino. Like some of the shit that they have computers, algorithms that can make all these trades. You know, so they're like, and that's what they're saying is like finance capital in particular has a certain character, and it's like this made-up character. My student loans got sold probably like 4 or 5 times the first year I came out of college. So I remember thinking like, fuck, bro, I'm on the hook for like my student loans when I came out of school was like $800 a month. And I'm like, bro, what the fuck? How am I ever supposed to pay $800 a month and do anything? And then I'm getting envelopes telling me like, oh, we sold your loans. Oh, we sold your loans. So that's when it started to crack in me. It's like people looking at me like, oh, you got to pay your debt back. I'm like, these motherfuckers don't even know they got my shit. Like they're selling it around. It's like, and that helped politicize me, but that's absolutely crazy. And that's how the building we're sitting in right now is a real estate investment trust. So they've done the same thing with this building. This building is sliced into different investment opportunities and then traded on the stock market. So like my landlord is actually like a manager of a financial portfolio. It's kind of crazy. Like of course I want them to cancel debt, and like I didn't believe the Biden administration for a minute when they were like, we'll cancel $50,000. Because if they do that, it literally tanks their house of cards, you know? 100.
So it's all about their survival and their friends' survival and the ruling class survival. So they're never going to do even a hair of that shit, you know?
Facts. That's huge. Biden was like one of the key architects of the student debt regime too. So it's like I knew he wasn't going to do shit about it.
You mean the people that, you know, control Biden's like, you know, meat sack, like not Biden himself, but the meat sack operators.
Well, that's pretty much my story about the RBC, you know.
We're already at the end? I thought there was more.
There's so much more, but I can't even, you know, basically it's like, I guess I did have some other reflections in terms of like, it's worth talking about them because they're a global behemoth, but they're not indefeatable. They're an actor, you know what I'm saying? Like, and it's interesting to look at the way they interact with the city of Minneapolis, and then learning how other people in other places are opposing finance capital, you know, because just I'm not comparing us to the Caribbean where obviously we're in the imperial core. It's not the same situation, but there's a rhyme in the way that the Royal Bank of Canada was able to seize control of that property in downtown Minneapolis. And now all the value of that property, the way it's used, the money generated from it is going to them. How do we make it so it goes to us? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
How do we make it so that the next time property becomes available, it could be put to like good social use and build wealth for us as a locality and as a people, as opposed to this predatory institution.
Yeah. Do you happen to, if those apartments are like sold already or like?
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I think it says it on their website. You can look. I think they have sold a few. I wonder.
They're going to be like some of the most expensive condos in the city, right?
I'm just
sure,
wondering like where's the demand coming from? Like, is it just like Chinese billionaires, like, who just want an asset in Minneapolis? I mean,
I think it's also the fact that once they create that asset, then that's on their balance sheet. So if they create an apartment that they're trying to sell for millions of dollars, they don't need to sell it necessarily. They could just hold it and it still benefits them financially because they have that wealth on their balance sheet.
See, you just named a key piece of like the whole wave of gentrification we're in. The more I'm learning is like that's a huge reason why there's been so much construction in cities lately is because global capital has recognized that fact. So it's like a place that they can store wealth. Yeah. I wonder if it's also too, what I bet is like, I bet you firms buy up the condos and then it's like the ruling class who travels around stays there, you know, like I have a family member who cleans homes and she's been in a couple of those situations where there's like some of those mansions by the lakes. It's like Target owns it. And then they have like rotating executives or consultants from like out of the country who will stay there for times.
Okay.
I don't know. I mean, I think like common throughout all of that is just a repeated like dehumanization. You know, like there's not even, I mean, literally not even needing people to fully occupy a home is like the ruling class just can act as if like, but I think I don't know how to say it, but it's like financial capitalism like replaces human beings as money, like only. That's the only way to view the world as in like existing in dollar amounts, not even like human beings.
Yeah, even to the point now where it's like the world is literally on fire. And they're still building these fucking pipelines. It's like, what the fuck? You know?
Exactly.
I think it goes to show too, like one thing that rings in my mind is like, you know, when the pressure was on Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota last summer, and he said like, look, I'm an environmentalist, but I'm a realist. We got to get the oil to market. And I'm like, that's the
mindset.
Yeah, that's finance capital governing our lives.
Yeah.
That means we don't have democracy. It means the oil's got to get to market. That's not nature saying that. That's people like the RBC saying that.
Yeah.
And again, there's something so specific about Western imperialism, like especially like Canada and the United States, presenting this like, well, I kind of care, you know, like just say you don't give a fuck because it's not adding up.
Yeah, and it's like
doesn't matter.
Like his big solution was clean cars, and that's just as like extractive and detrimental to the planet as you know, tar sands in a lot of ways. Like that lithium and all those minerals don't come from nowhere, you know.
Facts. Yeah, and it's like if you go on RBC's website, there's like a green champion, sustainable future type shit. Like there was a quote I read reading this where the guy was like, in order to get to the green future we need to use the oil we have now. And it was like, what? But the Gateway Tower, the project that made us all aware of RBC, this new one that they're building, it has a public opening sometime this spring.
Oh, yeah. It was on their website. 2022, supposed to be done. One of the 10th tallest towers in the skyline.
We should go fuck them up.
Like a open house? Like you can
Allegedly.
just go in?
It's like a public ceremony, like a ribbon cutting and all that.
Yeah, sounds like that sounds like a good potential action.
That's what I'm saying. Anybody out there who wants to get it going?
A euphemism. Anyway.
All right. Hey, Deanna, do you want to promote our radio appearance on Tuesday?
I would love to. Okay, Tuesday, 7 p.m. Tune in to 98.5 101.9 FM, KRSM, Southside's community radio programming. That is where you can find MPLS in the studio live, and then other times we'll be playing old episodes.
Yeah. And if you're like in deep Northeast or like further north, just, drive over to Southside and you can pick up this low-powered FM,
And there's an app.
Yeah.
And there's an app, right.
There's an app.
That
Thank
makes it
you.
easier.
Yeah, you can get on the internet also if you don't have we don't have a radio.
There's no experience like being in your car listening
Exactly.
to radio.
Yeah.
though.
Make it a cultural exchange. You know what I'm saying? Cross the
Just
river.
drive around
Right.
South Minneapolis on Tuesday nights.
Hell yeah. So what time on Tuesdays?
7 p.m.
7 p.m.
1900.
1900. KRSM, Money, Powerland, Solidarity podcast. I believe this is going to be our 99th public episode. We got 100 coming up. We're going to circle back to the Upper Harbor Terminal. Me and Amber got a mini series coming out. Local politics are heating back up again. I listened to a city council meeting that was super interesting the other day. We got big fraud connected to the mayor. We got all sorts of stuff to talk about. I heard that the Charter Commission is trying to abolish the Board of Estimates and Taxation because Samantha Priest-Stinson won.
Oh, wow.
Talking about a radical agenda. So I want to cover that story. If you're listening, we really, really appreciate you. Please leave us a rating and a review, 5 stars. Say something nice about the show. It helps us reach a broader audience. We're trying to take it to the next level. Thanks for tuning in. Money, power, land, solidarity.
We need money, land, solidarity. If you funny, stand very far away from me. We have running.